Please call the roll.
Senator Peterson, Senator Cosgrove, Senator Hashmi, Senator Pillion, Senator Locke.
Equally as thrilled.
You have a quorum, Madam Chairman.
Okay, we will go ahead and get started. Delegate Davis.
Ma'am. I think I've got two for you today.
Okay, what you got going?
The first one is House Bill 127. This is the, make sure I got these. Nope, we've already done that one. 128. This will be easier than 127. That was the governor's school bill. Okay. 128 is the diverse educator scholarship. So what this bill does is it sets aside and funds 2 students annually who go to school in a qualified elementary school, a district, which basically is those with 75% free and reduced lunches, etc., to go to an HBCU, get their teaching certificate, and graduate, become a teacher, and then go back into a qualifying area to teach. It's a year-for-year offset, and this would fund 2 annually to each of the 2 public HBCUs.
Senator Cosgrove.
Didn't we have a bill a lot like this out of the
Trying to
Senate?
remember.
Do you remember?
No, it was Senator Boysko, but hers wasn't this specific.
Okay.
It was a teacher training program. But it was more toward individuals. I can't remember specifically, but it was a bit more. It was broad. It was.
Well, I like it. I like it.
Madam Chair.
Senator Hashmi.
Thank you. I just want to clarify something you just said, Delegate, that it's connected to an elementary school. That caught me off guard. I didn't see any
Oh, that's right.
language about
So
elementary school.
it's on lines 23. It has a qualified public elementary or secondary schools.
Okay,
So it would be
thank
both.
you.
Yes, ma'am.
That's a little I. Okay. Are there those here who are in support of House Bill 128?
Madam Chair, Vicki Kitts with the Virginia Education Association. We do support this bill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, John Suswick with Virginia Professional Educators. We support the bill. Passing this bill will send a strong signal that the state is serious about reducing or doing something about the shortage of minority teachers. So we urge you to pass it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone here in opposition to House Bill 128? I see some shaking of the heads this way. Okay.
I move the report.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that House Bill 128 be reported. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, you got away with that one.
Thank you. Let's see if we can make it 2 for 2. So the second bill is, let's see.
1226.
Yes, thank you so much. 1226. And give me just 1 second. There we go. Okay, so there's a substitute for 1226.
Substitute.
Okay, second, is there a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded that the substitute be adopted. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, what's the substitute do?
Thank you. So, Madam Chair, this is like the 3rd iteration. We're trying to get to one thing. I think we finally got there. And what we're trying to get to is to look with how universities are, what metrics they're tracking and how they're tracking it to determine the analytics on what they, and Ryan, may I please have one of those too, please? Sorry. For the performance of the baccalaureate programs in public institutions. So what do they look at when they're deciding whether or not to continue a program at the university? And we went down the route initially of naming a couple of metrics, and what had come forward was not all universities look at the same metrics. And I don't think we need to compare a UVA to a Virginia Tech. I think what's important is to just see what each university is looking at as they track which ones are worth growing, which ones are worth maybe shrinking, and maybe some that may have been a little bit outdated. Getting best practices so they can share them with each university, and then looking at that 10-year trend line of those metrics. There are so many wonderful new programs that our universities want to offer, and they should, but we need to make sure that we have economies of scale, and sometimes there might be some that we don't have the same benefit from, and it would behoove us to maybe minimize some programs for the betterment of the newer ones that are getting much more or are in much more demand.
Is the purpose of this to determine what exactly?
So universities, some universities have been very diligent, and some maybe not so much on looking at programs and find out which programs are kind of outdated or not in demand as much, and then pivoting those funds towards other existing programs, or maybe to help create new programs that are kind of on cutting edge and are more in demand. And to see what universities are using which metrics, so we can kind of have best practices across all universities, and also look at for our own edification the 10-year cycle or the 10-year trend line on some of these programs, so we know really where the demand is in the Commonwealth of Virginia for our programs, and then what the benefit to the Commonwealth is as well.
This is not to say that just because my old friend over here is an engineer, and I was in the social sciences, that just because the social sciences trend line is going this way and his is going that way, that we're going to get rid of the social sciences.
No, ma'am. I would argue that we need more of your social sciences, maybe his engineer. That's kind of. No, we need a little bit of, we need obviously well-rounded individuals. It's just that we need to see where the demand is to make sure we're supporting our universities in that level, especially with some of these new skill sets that the 21st century is providing these great jobs for.
Okay. Any questions?
Madam
Senator
Chair.
Hushman?
Thank you. Delegate, colleges and universities are already compiling this data, and they're doing it at a program level. I know when I was program head at Reynolds Community College, every 5 years rather than 10 years, we had to produce a program report that took a look at exactly some of the areas you want to collect, the metrics of student enrollment, student graduation, post-graduation success of the students, faculty, and so forth. So that data is already being collected at every institution. It's also being reported to SHEV. It's being reported to SAC-COC, the accrediting body from the Southern Association of Colleges and Universities. So there is a lot of robust data out there housed in colleges and universities. So I'm just not sure what this bill is asking us to do that is not already being done.
Well, it's kind of funny you mentioned that, Senator. So the metrics that you're mentioning are the ones that are on the initial substitute line before this, and that was going to be the bill going forward until I was informed that not all universities actually track that data, and that surprised the heck out of me. So I was kind of curious, what data do universities use in tracking the demand and performance of their programs? And I'm under the understanding that universities all do it differently. So I think there's a benefit for best practice there, as well as to truly understand what are they doing. Because I like you, thought the data's there, let's just get a report, have them hit the export button and give me a spreadsheet and share it with all the education committees. And then I found that it wasn't that simple, because what I thought was the data that they would be using isn't what all the universities are using. So I'm not sure what each one uses.
Madam Chair, follow-up question.
Senator Hushman.
So I would argue that the data is there and that every institution is actually collecting it and tracking it, but perhaps doing it in a different format. Part of the problem is that it is quite challenging to compare different institutions with each other. When you have large four-year institutions, smaller four-year institutions, or community colleges, but the data is being collected. The part that concerns me in this bill is whether to continue or to eliminate an academic program, and I think that's the question that Senator Locke was probing just a minute ago. Is one of the concerns is that, yes, in fact, many of our traditional liberal arts programs are perhaps not producing as many graduates, but if the number of graduates is the metric we're going to be using, then that's going to imperil departments such as our foreign language departments, our archaeology, geology, all of these programs that perhaps are under-enrolling students because of the shift that we have in other programs that are now accelerating in demand. But it is, I would argue, dangerous for us to eliminate programs based on metrics of student and graduation into those from those programs, because we could potentially eliminate the core programs that define a traditional liberal arts degree, and those include our foreign languages, many of our social sciences, our literature courses, and so forth. So that's one of my concerns with the way it's phrased, to determine whether to continue or to eliminate an academic program at an institution. I think there are other considerations that really need to be put into play as we identify which programs to continue.
Yes, ma'am. And Senator, if I may say that we're not going to determine programs to eliminate or continue. What it says is that they shall supply the data, metrics, and tools that each institution utilizes to determine that. So right now our universities are determining annually what programs need to be kind of looked at closer, which ones should be grown, which ones should be scaled back, and maybe which ones they discontinue. And sometimes universities do discontinue programs. All this Section 1 bill says is that to share the metrics and the data that they're using to make these decisions. So we're not going to make any decisions for them. We're not going to make decisions when they give us the data. It's just to have them share with us the data they're using to make those decisions. And I think there's some best practices that can probably come out of it that all universities can benefit from.
Okay, any questions? Senator Pillon? So, anyone here to speak in support of House Bill 1226?
Madam Chair, Stacey Gordon with Partners for College Affordability and Public Trust, and we support the bill.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Anyone here in opposition to 1226? All righty, so I guess I go back to the question that having worked at an institution of higher education, albeit a private one, I note that the SACS accreditation process already requires that certain data be collected at all times.
Right.
And I know that institutions of higher education have to have this data for SACS anyway. So I guess I'm confused as to what it is that they are collecting that's different for.
So I'm not asking for them to collect anything that they're not already collecting. What this Section 1 bill asks is, what data do you utilize that they're already collecting? What data do you utilize to determine the growth or regression of a program? That's all this is asking for. And each university, I think Senator Hashmi is right. I think it differs by university, which is wonderful because that allows us to have best practices. And I don't think it's necessarily a need to compare a UVA versus Virginia Tech. It's kind of a trend line inside a university to see how they're doing it so we can garner some of the best practices. We know that there already are a number of new programs that universities are starting up. JMU, I think you'll have the bill, and we had it in the House for the budget for computer science, for their new majors. And we have a number of universities that have been growing on things. At the same time, they've actually curtailed and gotten rid of some. And we can't say whether that's good or bad, but what we can say is let's look at the metrics and see what they're doing or what metrics that they're utilizing in that determination, so we don't accidentally maybe get rid of a humanities that we shouldn't get rid of. But we also don't prevent us from growing in some new area that we should. And maybe there's some economies of scale. Maybe there's a situation where I've got a William and Mary and an ODU, and neither one has significant demand for a certain major, but maybe because they share certain classes, that they can still continue to offer it without having to get rid of that program going forward.
Okay.
Madam Chair, just one final thought here. You mentioned SAC COC as well. So anytime a program is created at an institution of higher education or eliminated, the institution has to provide the rationale, the metrics, the analysis for the establishment of that particular degree track. And so I really think this is redundant to the work that's already ongoing. The only thing I'm seeing here really that might be different is that a report is to be generated to the governor and to the General Assembly, but that information is actually available to the governor, to the General Assembly. We could just call Chev, and I see Director Blake here. We can just call Chev and probably get that information. I don't know if the director wants to speak to this bill in any way.
I'd like to hear from the director on
Mr. Blake. This is House Bill
that. I'm
1226.
Peter Blake. I'm Director of SHEV. Delegate Davis, nice to see you again.
Me too.
So Delegate Davis and I have been back and forth on this, and he's tried to be as accommodating as he can. Senator Hashmi's correct. There's a whole range of data that institutions use, first when they establish a program, and then periodically review it. And SHEV conducts what we call a productivity study of all degree programs every 5 years. We look at enrollment, we look at number of degrees conferred, and then if an institution falls below a certain threshold for a program, we ask them to justify it. And they would bring back to us things like SAC COC accreditation requirements, or anything related particularly to an institution's mission or its market, or other cost of the program even. So there's a variety of things that they come back and would have to justify to us whether or not. So many of these data do exist. If this is something that you would like for us to do, we can do it. So,
Already?
I'm sorry?
Already without this?
We have not gone out to the institutions in the way that this bill has been written and asked for the information, Madam Chair. But many of the data points that we have exist already, and we'd be happy to provide them. What this adds is, say, go to the institutions and ask them.
Madam Chair, and do you also report that to the General Assembly and the governor as directed in this bill, or no?
Senator, Madam Chair, we produce a report on productivity. What I don't know, Beverly, do you know, are we formally required to submit that?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I don't believe so. We have it, but we could, certainly.
Okay.
Without the direction of this, sorry, Madam Chair, without the direction of this bill, you could? Or do you need the direction of
Madam
this
Chair,
bill?
absolutely we could. I mean, the chair of the House Education Committee or the chair of the Senate Education Committee or Education and Health Subcommittee, anyone could ask us.
Okay. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we have it. So what's the pleasure of the committee?
Report.
I have to think on this one, Glenn.
That's okay. I can tell you I've looked at the productivity report. Peter was generous enough to give me a couple of reports, and they are helpful. It's not this, which this is very sliced, very easy to get to what we're looking at. And I think we're going to see data that isn't always in the productivity report, but I understand.
think we gently lay it on the table. Delegate, I've worked on the SACS report for my institution. I know the data is there. I know it's very easy to access, and any one of us can pick up the phone and get it from Chev or get it from the institution directly. So I appreciate the effort, but I think it really is redundant to what institutions are already doing. Thank you.
And I'm going to second her motion. And having worked on SACS reports, it is a lot of work.
I understand.
So the motion is to PBI. All those in favor, please say aye. 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 Those opposed?
No.
I'm going to throw something down there at you. So,
Yep. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Oh, it's your turn now.
House Bill 355.
Yes, Madam Chair. So House Bill 355 is actually very different from when it was originally introduced. What we're doing is essentially adding additional criteria that institutions of public institutions of higher education will list on their websites. We actually worked very closely with Chev and other members of higher education from the original requirements that we were asking for, and we pared it down into this, which is data that they've all said that they're already collecting, and so that they wouldn't necessarily have a problem with being able to make this available so that students and parents could be able to make a better decision with respect to choosing the institution of higher education. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, are there any questions? This is to compare each baccalaureate program at each institution.
Yes, Madam Chair. And yeah, lines 31 through 50 are kind of the new things that we're adding on to what they've already additionally done. But from what I understand, they're already largely collecting this information.
I don't have a 31 through 50.
There was a committee substitute, which is online. I don't know if you have it in the
I don't
original.
have that.
The House committee substitute.
And Madam Chair, those recommendations were brought to us by, I believe, a combination of higher ed and Chev.
Madam Chair.
Senator Hashmi.
So Delegate Frieda says, I understand it, a lot of this information is already collected by Chev and is or by the institutions too, so.
They currently collected, but now it would be
It would be the
something
report.
they would post, so it would just be easy to find. Again, all of us are kind of used to knowing where to go in order to collect and find this information. We just want to make sure it's readily available to the public. I was trying to play nice and everything.
Would Director Blake like to speak to this since his office would be responsible for maintaining the website?
Like to, or would you like for me to?
I would like you
We
to.
would like for you to.
Delegate Freitas is correct. We work very closely. He had a list of things before that we did not think were obtainable, and so we've edited it and modified it and believe that it's in a situation that we can gather and put out in a form for people to see.
Okay, I think I had the wrong one.
Madam Chair, I move to report.
Okay, this is House Bill 355. Okay, it's been, anyone here in support?
Madam Chair, Stacey Gordon, Partners for College Affordability and Public Trust, and we support the bill.
Thank you.
Delegate.
Anyone here in opposition? Okay, we have a motion to report. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, you got through that one unscathed. Let's see what you got next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you like to do 406?
406.
So 406 is fairly straightforward. What it does is, over the last couple of years, we've tried to ensure that freedom of speech is being protected on campus. What this does is essentially says that in the event that we have a clear case where somebody has violated the freedom of speech rights of an individual student, that they would actually be able to have some sort of legal recourse in order to bring against the individual or institution. So that's the bill, and I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Okay, what would be a violation of the freedom of speech?
So it has to do with the policies that have been set up that are currently in code. So we already saw this, I believe, with a bill that Delegate Landis carried. I think it was in 2016 or 2018. So it would be in accordance with Virginia code sections that we've already established. So it wouldn't be open to just any interpretation that a student might come up with.
Okay, so if it already exists, why do we need this?
Well, so what we did is we put in regulations with respect to what the university had to do, but we didn't give any sort of legal recourse to the student or a student organization if the university actually violated it. So this is essentially adding a mechanism where they can go to court and seek relief.
Okay. Senator Hashmi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I read your bill, but, and I'm not an attorney, so trying to figure this out, don't students or anybody actually, and especially those who are in our institutions of higher education, have the opportunity already to bring such grievance or such cause of action? I'm not understanding why we need the bill, basically.
No, I understood. And Madam Chairman, I would say also not being a lawyer myself, so still having my soul mostly intact. One of the things that we discussed when talking with attorneys on this is that obviously, theoretically, someone can attempt to bring some sort of suit as a violation of law, but when you have something specifically in code which essentially gives them standing to do so, if certain parameters are met, it essentially makes that process easier for them to do that. But again, only when the violations are met within the code sections that are currently in law. But I would certainly defer to counsel if they have a better explanation than I'm currently providing.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I would just say some of the things that are listed in this bill, especially on line 16, some of the damages or some of the relief listed out in terms of monetary damages, attorney's fees, and court costs, probably affords a little bit more than may otherwise be afforded without that specificity. It also says that you could assert the violation as a defense or counterclaim in a disciplinary action or civil administrative proceeding brought against the student or the student organization. And I'm not sure there's anything otherwise analogous in law, so that would create a new form of relief for the student or student organization.
And to that, Madam Chair, I would only say that one of the reasons why I think that's important to point out is that if you do have a student that otherwise is not in an economic capacity to be able to bring a lawsuit, the idea that they would be able to sue for not only damages but court fees and whatnot means that this was something that would be available to any student, not just ones that had the economic means in order to do so.
Madam Chair.
Senator Hashmi.
Do we have any examples of students or student organizations here in Virginia that have had grievances that they have not been able to hear in court or get the kind of response from the legal system?
So, Madam Chair, I would say we certainly have examples of it in other states. The question with respect here in Virginia is in part that if you don't have a mechanism whereby someone can actually get relief as a result of that, it can be somewhat hard in order to determine whether or not that metric's been met.
Okay, are there those here in support of House Bill 406? Anyone in opposition? Okay.
So, Madam Chair?
Yes.
My concern with this bill is that it may actually do the reverse of what we are hoping to achieve. And again, having worked at institutions of higher education, as our chair has as well, I think one of the core principles of any institution of higher education is that ability to speak freely, to have academic freedom, and to be able to engage in a lot of critical discourse without fear of lawsuits. That's a core principle of any institution of higher education. My concern is that we may actually do the reverse of what this bill is trying to do and create some limitations or create anxiety, most particularly among faculty, in the sense of what they can or cannot say or talk about, or ideas discussed in a classroom because of action that a student or student groups may take against them. That's just my concern. And one issue that I'll point to is that recently University of Toledo had passed a policy that required faculty and administrators to use students' chosen first names. And I believe it was a student group that brought action against the university because they wanted to reject that policy of requiring the use of students' chosen first names. This in particular impacts our transgender students. So that's my concern when I take a look at a bill like this, that it might actually have the reverse impact and cause a dampening of free speech rather than supporting free speech. So just wanted to give you an opportunity to address that.
Sure. Madam Chair, the hope is this would actually do the opposite, so that if you did have a student group that wanted to exercise the freedom of speech in order to oppose a particular policy, this is essentially saying that in Virginia we've already passed code sections which require the institution of public higher education to allow for and to ensure that they do have that freedom of speech, and that if they were to take additional measures, or if they were to take some sort of like punitive measures, so for instance, if somebody wanted to invite someone to speak and all of a sudden they wanted to put up, additional barriers that would prevent them to do so, or if it came to a situation where you had a group such as the one that you mentioned that didn't like what the policy was doing, and they tried to create some sort of environment where they weren't able to, get the room, or they switched the room around on them several times so they couldn't effectively have a meeting. This would be one where now they would have some legal recourse in order to have their case heard. And again, the way that the code sections were went with respect to freedom of speech, it was very much tilted in favor of a very broad understanding of freedom of speech, as opposed to being able to set up something selective where they could, pick and choose what speech they like versus what speech they don't. So if an organization tried to stand up and tried to go against the university for actually broadening free speech or having a policy, I don't think that would be covered under this. It would be more about protecting the rights of organizations to be able to engage in speech. And as we all understand, freedom of speech is not about engaging in speech that is already popular. Freedom of speech is really about protecting your ability to engage in speech that might not be popular, especially with the powers that be. And so providing a legal recourse for them to be able to demonstrate that we're serious in Virginia about student organizations and individuals being able to exercise that, I hope would have the opposite effect. It certainly was not the attempt in any way to dampen freedom of speech.
So, Madam Chair,
Senator Hashmi.
Just one more question then, and you brought up a great example. So what if we have a student group that wants to bring in a speaker who engages in particular in provocative speech or hate speech, and is actively promoting let's say, for instance, a white supremacist agenda, and are calling for militant action of some kind, would an institution then not have the ability to offer some kind of regulations as to what is or is not allowable for student organizations to engage in?
So, Madam Chair, that's certainly not my understanding. Obviously, that there are certain things that, freedom of speech does not mean you get to say whatever you want, regardless of the consequences. There is speeches which is regulated, but like, for instance, there was a university in New England, I believe it was Harvard, that invited someone to keep that was actually on a terrorist, or was affiliated with an organization that was on a terrorist list within the United States. And they were still permitted to speak because they weren't personally promoting some sort of, particular agenda, or they weren't, advocating violence against someone. And so I do think, obviously, there's a fine line here that we're trying to all be careful about. But again, the reason why we put our code sections in there was because we wanted to advance freedom of speech, not to the extent to where somebody could come and advocate for violence against somebody else, but in order to provide a robust, and civil debate within campus. So obviously, if somebody had a history of advocating for violence against innocents or whatnot, I think that would be something that this code section, the previous code sections would have already dealt with that. All this says is that when we have someone that, has been invited that is not advocating any of the things that you've particularly selected, or when you have a student group that maybe wants to protest against something that the administration is doing, and they're making it unnecessarily hard for them to be able to do that, this is the part where they could say, look, based off of these existing code sections, we have a right to get legal action, legal recourse.
Okay, I guess I'm just still concerned that if it already exists, then why do we need this, I guess.
And I think council's explained that one better than I probably could, Madam Chair, but I understand the concern.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair,
Senator Johnson.
The senator is reading, just looking at the sections that are referred to, section 23.1-400 protects students' associational rights by permitting religious political student organizations to limit eligibility for leadership positions, so that's already in code. The other section bans so-called free speech zones on public university campuses. The next section ensures public universities do not infringe on students' free speech rights generally. And then the final one protects freedom of the press for student journalists. So it seems to me like we have covered already a good bit in our code of protecting free speech at our universities and colleges.
Madam Chair.
Senator Peterson.
I apologize, I'm late to the party here. I had too many bills in the House. Is the point of your bill, Delegate, to basically give a cause of action? I mean, typically a cause of action is for damages, but this would allow injunctive relief as well as attorney's fees, which obviously would make it a lot more real. Is that kind of the point, that there already exists a cause of action, but this would give actual remedies for it?
Correct, Madam Chair. I think as it's currently written, the question is who would actually be in either a financial position or a legal position to be able to do anything about this without this legislation?
Okay, I need to look at these code sections. I'm not familiar with them, but all right.
Senator Pillion said it was all good.
Well, let me ask you this, because the House, my friends in the other body have told me to pay close attention when they had obviously this is a close vote. So can you just kind of briefly tell me, as on your honor, kind of what were the arguments against it? What did people say against it?
I don't, so to be honest, I can't remember who got up and spoke against the bill. Obviously this came before my subcommittee. If I remember correctly, the concern was that this was going to create a burden on institutions of higher education where essentially people could potentially bring frivolous lawsuits. I think that was the primary concern.
Okay. All right. Is anyone?
No, I've already done all that.
Okay,
We're at the
all right.
point of needing a
We're
motion.
at point of no return. Okay.
Committee's report.
Or do you have any proxies here, or what?
I got a proxy.
Okay.
Can I second with the proxy?
Sure you can.
Oh, and he'll second it then.
Okay, been moved and seconded that House Bill 406 be reported. All those in favor? All those opposed? I'm a no. Hashmi's a no.
All right, I'm gonna abstain for now. I want to look at these code sections and get a better feel for it. I would probably be a very soft green, but I'm gonna say abstain for now. So, does that mean he has to come back to full, or what do you want to do?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. My bad.
I know y'all just want to see as much of me as y'all want to see as much of me as you can.
Attorney's fees, I get all excited and so, okay.
That's a problem with lawyers. Okay. Okay, you have HB 1277.
Yes, Madam Chair. This one less controversial. So again, we're working with Chev and other institutions of higher education. We actually amended this quite a bit over on the House side. Originally, it was a little bit more far-reaching, set some deadlines with respect to academic years. What we've done now is we've added a couple of things. One, as opposed to just looking at education and experience with respect to military service, when our institutions of higher education are doing mapping with respect to credits, they're now also looking at things like training and credentials. Let me give you a perfect example of this. With most institutions of higher education, if you say you've been through Ranger School, what they say is, oh, PE credits. Okay, well, Ranger School is more of a management school. And so what this does is it sets out some other criteria that institutions of higher education can use in order to properly map, and then it also works with those same institutions to basically go into a more deliberative process. So, for instance, the Governing Board of Public Institution of Higher Education shall map the existing opportunities to earn education, experience, training, and credentials in the armed forces of the United States to award academic credits in its programs. So it's saying that. So it's not saying that they have to do something right now. It's giving them a criteria. And then it's an endeavor on behalf of these institutions to go and look at that so that we can have a more effective mapping. One of the reasons why I think this is so important is Virginia actually has, last time I checked, the highest percentage of veterans under the age of 40. So these are people that didn't necessarily do their 20 years in the military. They've got a lot of skills and experience, and the better we can map their skills, experience, training, and education into our higher education with respect to our degree programs, the more likely it is that they're going to stay in Virginia, go to those degree programs, and hopefully also work within our economy. And again, I just want to thank, Chev and other institutions of higher education for helping us amend this to get it to something where we think we can get it done.
Okay, so you're asking Chev to do this work?
So Chev is going to be a large part of that, along with in collaboration with our institutions of higher education. And then obviously, originally we had a requirement to work with Department of Defense. They recommended that we take that out because obviously we can't compel the Department of Defense to work with us, but that wouldn't preclude them from being able to work with appropriate bodies to do the proper mapping.
Okay, mapping takes a lot of work. So is there a cost to this?
There was no fiscal impact statement with the bill, either as introduced, which is actually far more reaching, or the amended version, which pared it down quite a bit.
Okay.
But Mr. Blake said he'd do it all himself. He's done.
That's why he ran out.
That's why I ran out.
Okay. Are there those here in support of House Bill 1277? Anyone in opposition to 1277? I mean, it's just, I don't understand how there's not a cost to this, because mapping is a lot of work.
I think part of the reason why there was not a cost, and this had to do with the way that the amendment was recommended, was that initially we had a deadline on when they had to do it. We don't have that deadline anymore, so it can be, kind of a slower, more deliberative process.
Okay.
I thank the delegate for working with us on this and extending the deadline. We do currently have policies that require that institutions have policies to award credit for military training and education. What we would hope to do is convene them to further refine the policies to determine how mapping might be done with different institutions. Obviously, they're very diverse in terms of how many transfer students might be bringing in this type of credit. So we would hope that many of them would join the Virginia Transfer Portal, and many of them have already mapped some degrees in the transfer portal. So we think a lot of this work is already being done by the institutions that have the greater military population. A bigger question might be what to do with the institutions that might have lesser population, and just trying to work with them and keeping that fiscal impact low, but we don't think that would detriment many students, as they don't enroll as many students as an ODU or George Mason.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so we have House Bill 1277. Wake up, chap.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that House Bill 1277 be reported. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Hashmi and aye. Okay, so I think, okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. Okay, I think that clears, Doctor. Okay. All right, we are done.